one of the things I would like to do is to focus on our time, this time, as evident of the shift point in the halfway Earth evolution, of human evolution on Earth, in order to suggest that this is, we're sort of straddling the fence between the first half and the second half of evolution on Earth. In the first half, by and large, our primary task was to read the teleprompter, follow the cue cards of nature within which the blueprints of the gods were embedded with the help of some parental sovereign leaders as a dreaming, sleeping, sub-sovereign group soul children of humanity. This is all changing now, and with our enthusiasm and hubris of the rationalistic Enlightenment period, which Goethe sort of disparagingly called a revolution in a piss pot, a revolution in a potty pan, much ado about something, almost nothing. We started to presume or assume that with the full development of the intellect, we had everything we needed to qualify ourselves for the first time as junior or incipient creator beings. And consequently, we are surrounded by the creations of the intellect, the synthesis of nature as an intellectual second nature. And it's rapidly becoming obvious that we need something more than the intellect to become creator beings. We're more or less in the position of the rock star who trashed the hotel room after the concert. It was a good idea at the time, but now the bills come in. And we have to add the spiritual training, understanding, the communication and participation in spiritual worlds in order to work as creator beings or co-creators with matter. In esotericism, in Western esotericism, the first half of the Earth evolution is called the Mars-Earth phase. The second half is called the Mercury phase. So in the Mars phase, we have the descending arc of spirit entering matter, sometimes called the fall. And it requires making space in matter for spirit. And we have to use our elbows and knees, fight for the space, plant a flag at the top of the hill. It requires the Mars forces and passion and glue. And so in the first half of human evolution, we have hard-wrought, step-by-step, solid ground to stand on, institutions that back us up, cultural integration and expectations that support us. And now all that's evaporating. All of that is going to the wind, and the Mercury phase is the alchemical phase. Everything that's been glued together in the first half of human evolution, on the recovery ascent to the descent of spirit and matter, in raising matter up to spirit, we have to unglue everything that has been bound and glued. And in this straddling the fence position, we're in the midst of sort of stepping in a psycho-spiritual quicksand as regards matter. There's very little we can rely on. The nuclear family is almost gone, disappearing. There's what we expected to support us community-wise, culturally, is evaporating. A lot of what we call community is bureaucratic and on paper. And so we don't have the full forces of the I am that I am, for individuality and freedom, and moving ahead, and we've lost most of the old community that has supported us up until now. And one of the signatures that is, I feel, very much a part of this experience as we're trying to redefine ourselves, transform ourselves, meet the challenges of the time, is once every 130 years, or 113 years, variable, there's a double eclipse of Venus with the sun, called a double transit of the sun. It serves, between the two, it develops an 8-year plateau between the two eclipses. And this 8-year plateau is a very germinal period for the initiatives in black and white magic that take the next century to unfold. This transit that's occurring now began in the summer of 2004, and it culminates in the summer of 2012. The great Mayan 13 Baktun calendar, which is much touted these days, began at about the time Kali Yuga began, about 3100 BC, even though, as far as anthropology and archaeology is concerned, there was no Mayan culture existent at that time. And it started on a double Venus transit of the sun, and it ends on a Venus transit of the sun. The Mesoamerican culture timed and tuned all of their calendar culture cycle on Venus, the Miztec, the Olmec, the Aztec, all of them. And part of the downfall of the Mesoamerican culture was connected with the decadent Venus mysteries. Now, what I'd like to do is go back to the last one as a point of reference, which was 1874 to 1882, with an 8-year span in between. And what happened during that time period was more or less the genie got out of the bottle. There was you had Blavatsky coming over to New York and meeting Olcott. Manfred Schmidt-Brabant claims that they were both directly under the tutelage of Christian Rosenkreuz for 3 years. And then starting a Theosophical Society. Now at the same time, Walt Whitman, or
Emerson.
Yeah, Ralph Waldo Emerson, his legacy had been picked up by Bronson Alcott and formed into the Concord School of Summer Philosophy for 10 years. And that was a tremendous Renaissance influence which affected European philosophy across the sea. Mary Baker Eddy sent her initial manuscript to be proofread by Bronson Alcott to see what he thought about it. What, to my mind, was going on during that period was that in the Council of 869 in Constantinople with the church, spirit was banned. In the 11th canon of that council, they basically said, you may have body and soul, but spirit is to be if you do use it, it has to be theoretical, abstract, symbolic, or metaphorical. If you treat it as an autonomous real-time function, you're out. You cannot be in here. It was technically over a debate, argument with a character named Photius, and the church claimed he was trying to produce a dual soul. But the issue is much larger behind that. And that was the permanent separation of the Eastern and Western Church from the point of that council. The Eastern Church took spirit and guarded it, developed it, and in the Western Church it became a heresy. And then shortly afterward, you had, especially around the 10th, 12th century, you had the tremendous emergence of dualism. You eliminated the Trinity and you lapsed into dualism, the heaven and hell vertical dualism, and you had to pay your tithe and cover your bets in the mutable soul realm. That was not guaranteed. Then after that vertical dualism caught between heaven and hell, the scientific movement developed around the 14th century, and they slipped. They said, we're too smart for this stuff. We're not going to fall for this. But they created a horizontal dualism, the Cartesian split, the inner phenomena, the outer phenomena, nothing in between, the legacy of which we're still surrounded by today. And then, in this double Venus transit of 1874 to 1882, one of the things that happened was Wilhelm Wundt of the Leipzig school, who established the first experimental psychology laboratory in the world, declared in, I think, 1878 or 1879, right in the middle of that period, the human is a sophisticated animal. Shortly after De la Mettrie in France, it said the human is an exotic machine. And Pavlov had been writing letters to contemporaries saying this term soul, this ambient, unqualified term soul, which is still lingering around the edges of science, makes a mess all over the lab table. We've got to get rid of it. We've got to clean up. We've got to get focused here. And Wundt was the one who actually did it. And so he did to the soul what the Council of 869 did to the spirit. He said, if you treat the soul as an autonomous real-time function, you'll be out. You are not progressive. You are not in the scientific circle. You won't be quoted or cited. And he said, if you treat the soul, it's not helpful, but if you do, it's got to be theoretic, symbolic, metaphoric, and in actual science application, only in biofeedback experiment. Blood rate, heart rate, that sort of thing. And so that set the stage for the 20th century as far as the attack on the reduction and minimalization of the soul. A lot of people, if you talk to them today who are Baptist or Catholic or various forms of Christian, and even in other areas, if you ask them, what is the soul? Qualify it for me. Describe what constitutes soulness, and especially what would be the distinction between soul and spirit, they are generally at a loss for an answer. Now, what I see happening during this 1874-1882 period is that the A-team came in to revive the spirit, to reinstate the spirit in such a way that it could no longer be edited out or marginalized anymore. Steiner's whole effort was to establish a solid spiritual science that could be congruent, complementary to any healthy, clearly developed, non-commercial, natural science. And so this was developing in the beginning of in the 1830s. You had the spiritualist movement, and in a certain sense, at arm's length, I'd sort of say that's almost kindergarten. And then you have Blavatsky, Theosophy, and that's sort of taking it to high school. We've got to be much more focused, much more aware than just involving ourselves in phenomena or invoking phenomena. And in a certain way, Steiner perhaps taking it the next step to college. You know, if we're really gonna understand and work with the spirit, these are some of the things we need to deal with. So now, one of the other things that was happening during that period is that it was the germination of commercial media. A lot of these things that existed before that 1874 period, but all the commercial breakthroughs came in that 8-year period. Breakthroughs in newspaper, telegraphy, radio, telephone, television. Movies were imagined before radio, but they were constructed afterward. But in the pivotal years, right in the middle of that period, where Steiner said that was the Michael event, where the Archangel Michael was advanced to a time spirit for all human culture. It was the first electronic image was transmitted, which I would consider the birth point, the germinal point for TV movies as today. And what's happening now is all of that stuff, theosophy, anthroposophy, Thoreau, Emerson, there were many Renaissance events happening at that time. It was sort of breaking open the whole arena that flowered fully in the 20th century. That has now everything, the media is in full nightshade bloom around us. And during this period, what the black magic, white magic initiatives are concerned with is installing all the electromagnetic technological environment in the human being. It's proliferated outwardly, and now the move is to put it in. And the human biochip implant is the docking platform for doing that. And of course, extending that, proliferating that objective, it becomes obvious that we're heading into a brave new world of sorts. And it's also what I'm seeing is that there's sort of a flying wedge of talented souls coming in to reinstate the soul, which was edited and marginalized out. People like Hillman, with the Jungian movement, Robert Sardello, Willie Bento has started an official accredited academy of psychosophy. But while they're doing that in the background, the forces of opposition are attacking the body. In the reductionist model, if you want it simpler, more efficient, more accountable, you just keep getting rid of things. The appendix, who needs that? What's it for? The tonsils, take them out. And it's getting to the point, the Cyberspace Manifesto of 1998 put it very succinctly. They said the last obstacle to electronic nanosecond networked freedom is the body. And that's the technological overemphasis. I'm not recommending we go Luddite or neo-Amish, but the overemphasis is eroding the integration of the very foundations of incarnation, the body, which needs to be built up. One of the most damaging forces for the body and soul is an arrhythmic life. One of the most health-giving, integrating forces is rhythmacy. And that's, we've all experienced how far that has gone out the window in a comparative sense over dealing with our grandparents, great-grandparents, parents. Us, our children emerging now, are very exposed to the whirlwind of arrhythmic life. What I would suggest is that in the current situation, I can go back and forth a bit to elaborate this, but in a certain sense, using broad strokes, the 20th century was the first public access to the Tree of Life mysteries. In the human individual, the personalized Tree of Life is the endocrine system, the life forces, the solar plexus, the liquid flow movement, which we don't have conscious control of, by and large. It's part of a habitual, subconscious, unconscious realm. The personalized Tree of Life, or Tree of Knowledge mysteries, is what's called the astral body, which is anchored in the brain and nerve system. That has to do with our self-consciousness, our self-awareness, our desire level that enhances the personality. And for the first time, with the risen Christ mysteries of the 20th century, along with that came public access to the Tree of Life, and we could rush in to the more or less abandoned temple. And most people decided to have a beer party in the empty temple. You know, the folks are gone. I've got a good idea. This is a great space. We've never been allowed in here. So the social sciences started in the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, sociology, psychiatry, psychology, and their objective was to see what was under the hood.
So now we're going to take a little smaller piece of the cherry pie, okay? Say yes.
Yes.
Okay, now how many of you believe in spirits? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you don't believe in spirits? Raise your hand. Okay, good. So can my spirits talk to your spirits? I need your verbal permission.
Yes.
Okay. All right, the games will now officially begin. We're here in this place because of Madame Blavatsky. Does everyone know who she is? Okay, you're all clear, so I'm preaching to the choir on that. All right, what I wanted to bring in was some other things that would give you a clear focus on her. And there are two approaches. One is I'm interested in what they're saying, and the other is I'm interested in them. And when I read someone and I like what they're saying, eventually I get interested in them. So this remarkable creature, this Madame Blavatsky, who apparently was a woman of very great genius, was renowned, according to Steiner, who did not meet her but met Annie Besant later. He said Blavatsky was renowned for her devotion to the truth. Now, I know that she has been discredited a lot by people, and I'm always suspicious of people who make their career out of discrediting other people. Steiner said something very interesting. He said, wherever there is criticism, beneath there is hatred. In other words, if you can't be creative in what you say, then something else is happening. So we have a lot of debunkers now, but we don't have many bunkers. So I'm here to bunk Blavatsky. All right? Yeah, go team. So what did she do? Well, let's find out what happened before, because we are a living being, and that means what we do is we respond. People say, how are you? And we either say, give them the plastic, I'm fine, leave me alone, or we actually sit down and tell them my heart's breaking and I feel like crap. Okay, so it's one or the other, because we are responsive. Now, Blavatsky was no different. She was Russian royal blood, so she was very responsive. What was she responding to when she came to America? Well, the first thing she was responding to was spiritualism. Do you know what spiritualism was and is? Has everybody got a handle on that? If you have, raise your hand. And if you want a little blurb by me, raise your hand. I'll blurb a little. I studied spiritualism with a medium who was a certified reverend for about 4 months. So the residing kingdoms of spiritualism are Chesterfield and Lilydale, which are both spiritualist camps in America that still exist and still teach. The old blue-haired ladies are very strict, and they still get results. Now, what was happening is that spiritualism was experiencing something from about 1848 on with the Fox sisters. And what happened with the Fox sisters up in New York is people would sit in a room and they'd talk to spirits. And the spirits would talk back, and they'd hear rapping on the wall or in the fireplace, or the lampshade would lift up and down, or there would be noises, or one would hear voices. And there was basically a wholesale release of psychic phenomenon, and it wasn't just happening in New York with the Fox sisters, it was happening all over North America. But it was in pockets. And people were trying to understand what is happening here. So I want you to know it wasn't just in one area, it was a national phenomenon. Yes, I'm sure a portion of it was hysteria. Yes, I'm sure a portion of it was wishful thinking. But as usual, a portion of it was also true. Now, Colonel Alcott got interested in this spiritualism. He wanted to know from a scientific point of view what was happening. And so the only way they could evaluate this business of the spirits moving objects, this is the only way they could describe it, spirits talking, spirits moving objects, what we call now psychic phenomena, was to study the phenomenon. So he became very interested in the various phenomenon and testing people. Is it real? Are they faking it? Because as you all know, professional magicians can fake psychic phenomenon, right? We have that on television all the time. We have people like James Randi, sponsored by the Communist Party, and other people who specialize in debunking all spirituality. And it's their career to do what? Debunk anything spiritual via debunking psychic phenomenon. So I want you to know that some people have constructed their whole lives out of not bunking, but debunking. Okay, and wherever there's spirit, wherever there's critical inquiry, you've got to be very careful with discriminating critical inquiry, because as long as it remains creative, you're safe. But the moment it veers into personal issues, it becomes more or less an art of refined hatred. So I want you to have this idea in mind. There are a lot of ways to skin a cat, and we're going to try to skin this one in as nice a way as possible. So Alcott was looking at phenomenon. Blavatsky came in. She met him, and she said, I am here to make you look at what's more important. And he said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, you need to know that you don't have to be in touch with the dead to produce phenomena. And he said, you mean that these are not deceased spirits moving things? And she said, yeah, watch this. And so Blavatsky then began reproducing all of the phenomena of the spiritualists in front of Alcott and people who would come to see her. So Blavatsky wasn't a woman who just sat in a chair and talked. She could duplicate. She could make things float in the air. I think she had a cup of tea come across the kitchen and float in front of her and drank it, and it floated back in broad daylight. So a lot of the phenomena the spiritualists were doing was always done under dark conditions or semi-dark conditions. This is why the skeptics got in and people started faking it. Blavatsky could do the same phenomenon as the spiritualists, but she could do it in broad daylight. Moreover, she was telling him that it wasn't who? It wasn't the dead. So naturally his question was, what the hell is going on here? And she said, it's a long story, but I've had some good teachers. Okay, and this began the discharge of Blavatsky's teaching. He thought she was great. It made sense to him. And this place that we're sitting in now is largely a result of that, come hell or high water or politics or disagreements. The rocket was launched, and it was good, and it was good critical, clear reasoning, and it was a response to spiritualism. But Blavatsky did have a lot of these psychic powers that people today still wish they had. So she had the power, but she also had the learning. But she was very clear that other people, other beings were doing what with her? Talking to her. She said, I'm not the source of what I'm teaching. I have teachers. Now, there was a lot of talk about her teachers being fabricated because she said she received telepathic messages from her teachers. Cranston wrote a big book on Blavatsky. I've got a copy over there. And only 100 years after Blavatsky's death has a lot of the evidence emerged of witnesses who met her and her teachers in India when she was on tour before she came to America. So I'm letting you know that the physical evidence of everything that she said didn't actually appear till about 100 years after her death. Are you good for that? But I want you to know that it is there. But they didn't have access to it when she was active because she was an extremely private woman, and she wasn't interested in trying to prove things to the public. She was trying specifically to get the teaching of Theosophy out. You understand? So she was very much directed toward a bullseye, and what happened on the periphery, she was trying not to be distracted. So after she duplicated this phenomenon with Alcott and other people, she began to try to wean them off of exciting things. I have to tell you this story. There was a gathering in one of the salons, and there was a skeptical woman in the room, and someone asked Madame Blavatsky if she could reproduce the banging and popping noises in the walls of the house. And she said, who wants to know? And there was this lady in the back who raised her hand, and she said, I can reproduce this phenomenon. And suddenly there was a loud bang, and the woman's eyes got real big because Blavatsky had popped one of the fillings in her teeth. And she ran out. And Blavatsky burst out laughing and said something like, well, she wasn't expecting that, was she? So I want you to know the woman met the confrontation head on. So she made her impression, and then she began her teaching. Now, what was downloaded through her and the teachers she had been with in Asia and Russia is particularly interesting because the Russian Orthodox Church, as Brian mentioned, they maintained within their theology a concept of the Spirit that the Catholics had done what? Gotten rid of. So she was raised in that environment. Moreover, when she was a child, she went up to the mouth of the Volga River with her family and visited one of the most remote communities of Buddhists in the world. And there's a whole Russian community of Buddhists at the mouth of the Volga River. They practice pure Buddhism. And they had come over from Mongolia, I think 500 years before or something. And so she was exposed to other religions as a child. And she had resources. She had a wealthy family, so she traveled extensively. So when she met her teachers in India, and she met one of her Indian teachers in England, they said, "We have a job for you." And they began to teach her, and she did study in India up around Kashmir and Srinagar. She had a house. And in a lot of other places, the evidence is pretty plain. She was one of the few white women that traveled extensively throughout India and Tibet besides Alexandra David Neal, the French woman. Blavatsky dressed as a man, she said, most of the time. And as I said, later witnesses came forward having recalled seeing her there, people who lived there. So we know she really did it. She got the learning. Plus she had the background. Plus she had the psychic ability. You got the picture? Yep. So she began writing, and what she began writing seems to have been as though someone got the compiled teachings of Asia and put a funnel to her head. What was the text I told you it turned out to be a translation of the Buddhist canon? Brian? I forget. Okay, she translated one text with a DZ, Dazan?
Oh, stanzas of Dazan.
The stanzas of Dazan, you need to realize, as a student of Tibetan Buddhism, I'm familiar, there are two sets of commentaries. One is called the Tengur and the other is called the Kangur. And apparently she had gotten hold of, I think it's the Kangur. You have to realize this is hundreds of volumes. And somehow she had managed to begin downloading this. I mean just downloading it. You can't possibly memorize 150 volumes. And she said, "I'm not writing this, it's just coming through me, but it's good stuff." And it's only been in, I think, since 1980 that someone actually took that text and matched it against the Buddhist canon and said, "I'll be darned, that's a really nice translation of a portion of the classical Tibetan Buddhist canon." No one had had the ability to translate it. And they didn't have access to the manuscripts. But there she was sitting at the table every night, and this stuff was just pouring out of her. So what's interesting to me is how precise and accurate it was, and how a scholar, an academic, recognized what it was. So Blavatsky became this terrific download of teachings, and most of it she described as Buddhism without the trappings, but specifically Tibetan Buddhism without the trappings. And this is important because the Tibetans had access to a lot of wisdom that predated Buddhism. So when you say Tibetan Buddhism, you're talking about something that takes in two streams. You understand? Just say yeah. Okay, good. I want to be sure that you're awake. Shuffle your feet and wiggle your shoulders. Now, she's getting this material and downloading, and everybody's saying, "Where is this coming from? We know it's right. We can't." The scholars wouldn't touch her, and the ones that did were profoundly influenced. And artists and writers and historians, everyone who met her came away impressed. And the ones who never met her would try to renounce her and talk behind her back. I remember Chesterton, who was sort of the Roman Catholic defender of the faith in England. And he's very funny, and he's a great writer, and he's a journalist. He said Blavatsky represented the worst of Victorian womanhood and far-fetched Eastern mysticism, and he painted a really nasty picture of her. You understand? Now, he never met her. Had he met her and had a little face contact, he probably would have felt a little different, because she was nothing like this caricature that people often had of her, especially when you met her. So other people met her, and she changed their lives. I could give you a list. If you get Cranston's book, there must be 100 chief people from that period of history who went and had personal interviews with her, writers, scientists, you name it. Einstein kept Isis unveiled on his desk. So she touched every major field of knowledge, is what I want you to know, and anyone who took her seriously took her writing seriously. And this all came in as a response to spiritualism and began to flow. Now, they asked her, and it's in your little book that you're going over here. Who's studying this right now? Yeah. They asked her, is this Buddhism? Is what you're teaching Buddhism? And she said, no, it's Theosophy. And they said, why isn't it Buddhism? And she said, because we're specific about the soul that reincarnates. And you see, in traditional Buddhism, there isn't one. You have something that can be dissolved, that is not permanent. In fundamental Buddhism, you don't have a soul. You're an aggregate of forces that come together and then do what? Dissolve. Now, when Buddhism went into Tibet, they said, oh, wait a minute, wait. They said, that may be, but it's possible for you to make a soul. So the Tibetan idea is that you can construct what? A soul. But they don't follow the Christians that you're born with one. They say, no, you're not born with anything. The soul is only developed in proportion to the amount of work you put into it. But there is one, it can be made. Now, Blavatsky said in Theosophy there is a soul, it does reincarnate over and over, and that's what separated it from fundamentalist Buddhism. Are you guys clear now? But I want you to separate that again from Tibetan Buddhism, which has taken in all sorts of other ancient teachings, a lot of which you have in Theosophy, as Blavatsky would say, without the trappings. So she said Buddhism without the trappings, right? Now here's something else very interesting. In America, prior to Blavatsky, we had a guy named Ralph Waldo Emerson. Anyone heard of him? Okay, now, he said what interested him was Christianity without the trappings. Now what's interesting about Emerson is his most condensed and profound writings that were written at the very end of his life were not published till what? 3 years ago?
Yeah, 2008.
2008. So you can get those now. You can finally see where Emerson was at in America with this profound, super condensed, mystical Christianity without the trappings. So this was just released in 2008. No one got the papers out of the chest and translated them because they figured he was an old, senile old man because the handwriting was a little difficult to read. But a couple of guys said there's something there, and they found it. It's published. And Emerson talked about Christianity without the trappings, and everything that Emerson mentioned in its basic alphabet block form later appears on the scene with Rudolf Steiner. So it popped over from America after Emerson's death, and whatever spirit that is of Christianity without the trappings seemed to stand at the shoulder of Rudolf Steiner, because he began to sound quite a bit like who? Emerson. So there's two streams now. Buddhism without the trappings and Christianity without the trappings. And they met. Okay? And they met when Steiner joined the Theosophical Society. He was interested. Blavatsky had passed away, and Steiner came into the society, and he became the representative of all the Theosophical lodges in Germany. So and there's a photograph of Annie Besant and Steiner standing together, and there's a note from Annie Besant that says, Mr. Steiner represents something different from what we teach, but he is a real friend, and we are glad to have him with us. And so she recognized his gift, but also his what? His difference. Okay. So Steiner headed the German section, and these things processed together, and there was a disagreement. And I'll tell you what the disagreement was over. It was over two main things, and I think they're both very fascinating because they're both worth exploring. And one was the identity of the Maitreya. You remember Krishnamurti? Do you all know this story about Krishnamurti? Okay, well, just to give you the cliff notes, Besant and others in the Theosophical Society had discovered this young genius in India named Krishnamurti, who was later called Krishnamurti. Okay, and they said he is the return of Christ. Now Steiner, who was coming in with Christianity without the trappings, he said, I don't think so. So the disagreement was over the identity of who? Krishnamurti. So that was a big deal because Steiner said, from what I've researched, Christ doesn't need to come back again in the body. And that's a whole nother very rich discussion about where is Christ and what's he doing, especially in light of where Christianity is in history right now. Well, Steiner said he's here and he's unavoidable, and the contest is to just pay attention to where he is and not be distracted. This is the biggest battle we have as people in modern time, is the battle of the mind. And what we're deprived of through the mass media is the ability to concentrate, to pay attention. So Steiner, his first spiritual exercise to his students was an exercise of concentration. He said, this is going to get harder because technology is coming, machinery is coming, TV is coming, media is coming, propaganda is coming. You're going to have to learn to concentrate because you are going to be just torn to shreds by all of the distractions you're going to be provided with. Does this make sense to you? So this is where Steiner was coming in. Now he also said this, as he came in, he said, the release of all the information that Madame Blavatsky was given as it came into this time was the weapon to be used against scientific materialism. Everybody was turning to science for answers, and they weren't believing in anything. They wanted everything to be proven. And what I say about modern science is it will prove to you everything but the meaning. So if you look at something and you want to know what it means, you will not get it from science. You'll get what it's made of. So what science normally does is it takes a bird and it kills it and cuts it open and looks at it and tells you what's inside, and that's science. Do you understand? It's a kind of thanatology. You got to kill something, pin it down, break it apart and look at it, and that's science. So science has basically vacuumed the meaning out of everything and presented us with the shells. Okay, I'll give you another example. In one of C.S. Lewis's books, the children meet this very beautiful, warm, odd, bright being that doesn't quite have a body. And they have a talk with it. And then the children leave. And they ask someone else, who was that? And they said, oh, you were talking to the sun. And the children said, no, the sun is just a ball of gas. And they said, no, you don't understand. That's what the sun is made of. That's not what it is. So this separation between science, which is what things are made of, and meaning, which is what it is one of the first battlegrounds of Blavatsky's information from all of the ancient religions and philosophies she represented, was to bring people back to the world of the spirit by reintroducing them to the ancient wisdom. And she called it specifically ancient wisdom. And I'm saying this because the tendency at the time was to get caught up in her activities or phenomenology, miracles. And she was trying to say, look, it's child's play. Don't get distracted by it. You need to know the wisdom. So she brought in all of this wisdom and dropped it off in her books. And luckily, she met Annie Besant, who was a suffragette, revolutionary, two-fisted Amazon woman who wanted to get things done. And she passed on the society to her because she knew Annie Besant could what? Get it done. But Annie Besant did not have Madame Blavatsky's psychic gifts. But she had something that was probably equally important, and that's some political savvy. So she carried the organization. Anyway, she discovered Krishnamurti. Steiner said, no, it's not Jesus, it's not Maitreya, he's not a bodhisattva. I don't know if Steiner ever said who he thought Krishnamurti was, because as you all know, Krishnamurti stayed in the Theosophical Society for some time, and then when he broke away, he became one of the most famous teachers of the century. So whoever he was somebody important. You all follow me? So my point is that whatever the Theosophical Society saw in him, it was something good and it survived, and he wrote incredible books, and his lectures are on YouTube. You can actually just put them up and listen to Krishnamurti. They're extremely profound. And Krishnamurti was interested in one thing when he got toward the end of his life, and he said that the human being has to have complete freedom inside themselves. He said, we're beyond the nursemaid, we're beyond the priest telling us. Now it's our turn. Each of us have to become a priest and priestess unto ourselves. This was his big message. And this frightened people, because what does that do to the religious institutions? Yeah. He didn't say you couldn't study them, but he said they're not going to give you the answer to your heart's desire, but they will give you the wisdom. They'll give you wisdom, they'll give you teachings, but they won't give you the answer to the heart's desire. Am I making sense to you? So I need you to realize how significant he is and how significant that discovery was and how that all came out of this stream. So I want you to see this as a river. These are rivers of teaching. And you can go back at any point in the river and get tremendous treasure out of any branch and bring it up to the future, because times have changed. So you've got to update it and apply it. Am I making sense to you? Yeah. Okay, so when they disagreed, Steiner bailed from the Theosophical Society in 1910, and in 1912 he started the Anthroposophical Society. Anthropos being the study of the human. Now Theosophy continued, so I want you to see that all the Asian streams and everything that Blavatsky put on the launch pad continued to influence art, science, and culture, particularly in America, and a lot of times behind the scenes. So you find people like Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse, all of these famous scientists and inventors, they were on the brink of psychic research and scientific research, and nearly every one of them read Blavatsky. So you need to be aware of this. She has been so marginalized by the history books, and yet she was a major figure in the 20th century. And if you go back and look, you'll see who she's influenced. It is just incredible, and people in countries all over the world. In fact, she influenced George Russell, who's another fantastic character in Ireland, who basically was the main fire of the Irish literary renaissance with William Butler Yeats and all the great Irish poets and writers that sprouted in Ireland. They came out from Russell, who was basically following exercises and teachings from Blavatsky and pouring them into old Celtic legends and finding out the meanings of the Celtic legends all over again. And it wasn't just Ireland, that's one example. Blavatsky returned to India. One of the reasons that she went to India was she was there to reawaken the Indian interest in their own culture, which the British had what? Yeah. So I want you to see how significant she was, and that the stream continues. It continues here, continues now. Steiner's Anthroposophical Society, when it sprouted and grew legs in Germany, suddenly biodynamic farming, totally organic farming that's so devoted to the earth they talk to the elemental spirits. Biodynamic medicine, where you treat the body, the soul, and the spirit. It's just as comprehensive as Ayurvedic medicine, but it uses all of Western science with it. Okay. Weleda Cosmetics, all the natural organic cosmetic companies that appeared in Switzerland appeared as a result of Steiner's influence. He started a whole new trend of architecture. And Waldorf schools, there's about 800 around the world now. And they teach the child believing the child already has a soul, and so they already come in with something that has to be brought forward. They do not treat the child as a pot to put a stick in. They treat the child as a match you light on fire. Okay, so it's a very different approach. So all of these things came out of Steiner and anthroposophy, and it's moving simultaneously with this blossoming and all these tentacles from Blavatsky's teachings going out into the arts and sciences in America and Europe. Okay? There's a little picture of where we were, and now sit up straight in your chair and take a breath and look at this and realize that it's happening again now. So, you know, if teachers come forward, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff with Bruce Lipton and DNA and the teachings of Abraham on vibrational awareness and getting people in an emotional harmonic, and the physicists are coming up with the theologians, and it's getting more and more in contact. There's getting to be more and more agreement again between Eastern and Western ideas and material science and spiritual ideas. Do you understand? So this wave is hitting again, so enjoy it. But we have twice as much distraction because of media. So the war for your body, soul, and spirit is largely between your ability to concentrate on what's important for you alone and what the forces outside want you to look at. Does this make sense to you? That's essentially the next stage of black magic versus white magic is, do you want a mind of your own, or do you want someone else to run it? This is where we are. And I'm sure some of you talk to people every day and you wonder, where's their mind at?
Real quick, can you speak about the antidepressants and all of those that the pharmaceuticals are shoving on people to numb their minds?
Well, I can talk to you as a traditionally trained Muslim herbalist. All modern medications, as a rule, cool the liver. So if you want to put a block of ice in your liver, you take a medication, and what that does is it numbs you out. And it prevents you from digesting the finer elements of the food and carrying them into the bloodstream to be distributed to the cells. So what medications do, in essence, all medications, is block the liver. The Egyptians thought the liver was the seat of the soul. Now, the Arabs, they didn't believe that, but they did say it was the final stomach. So this stomach on this side digests the coarse elements. The liver digests the most refined elements of the food. So when you pray over the food, it's the liver that feels the vibration of the prayer. So if you block it off by cooling it and letting it get gummed up, you're not able to feel the subtle vibration of blessed food. How do you like that? Is that good enough? Okay.
If one finds oneself depressed, what can you do that's not going to depress the liver?
Yeah, it's a question. It's a question. So she's asking me what the cure is for depression, and you watch the news on TV, and you really need a cure, don't you?
Yeah.
Some people go to the horror movies. Some people go to horror movies I'm interested in watching how much more horror there is on television. Because I'm thinking people really want to see heads come off and blood go everywhere. And the anticipation, the nervous anxiety of a horror movie. I'm thinking, what is it? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to do to themselves? Look, wherever there's a response, there's a need. So if someone needs to be scared to death, it tells me that they're not feeling enough. And then the other question is, why are they not feeling enough? Something is, they've lost the ability to feel, so they've got to be shocked. So what is happening in this picture?
So overwhelmed.
Yeah.
All the media and everything.
Well, it's like the soul has a callus. You shock, 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 and eventually the person's unshockable, so you have to raise the level of the shock to impress them. This is an odd time to live because you don't see much about good fathers. And women are always fighting. Think about it. The dominant theme for a woman these days is fighting. Fighting men, fighting a job, fighting stupidity. Of course, the man is not present, or he's a dick, or he's a fool. That's pretty much the media presentation, and heroes are only superheroes. There's not a human hero. So what's happened is the role of the father has been erased. The mother's forced to be two, and there's no hero present except one that's not possible. Is this making sense to you? So how does it make you feel? Helpless. Now, if a child is helpless, they will run to you. So if you're helpless, who are you going to run to? Yeah. So I encourage you to find out who that self is that you're going to run to. There's one there, but you're going to have to get the, whatever that is you use on your feet to get the calluses off the feet. You've got to get that on your soul and polish things up a bit. You will have to go in. It's not out per se. Okay, go ahead. That's fine. Thanks. Thanks, folks.
Brings up initiation. Initiation can sound quasi-romantic, but in functional terms it involved life and death issues. You failing initiation could in many instances forfeit your life. You had to face the abyss without any props or with minimal props. And at this time, Western science has dedicated a lot of its efforts to penetrating the 9 layers of the inner earth. Now, the biological womanhood has, with her reproductive system and her uterus, a 9-layered organism that is an antenna for the 9 layers of the inner earth. The 9-layered embryo is also part of that picture.
Those 9 layers that he's talking about that are inside our planet are also inside us. So the planet's a big tuning fork and you're a little tuning fork and you're both vibrating together. So when he's talking about going into the 9 layers of the inner earth, he's talking about your subconscious, what Freud called the subconscious, parts of the psyche that are dark, things about yourself you don't understand, unpleasant manifestations. Okay, so when you're saying 9 layers, one of the more recent models that may be of use is the Enneagram. Do you know the Enneagram? 9 components of the personality, the 9 masks, in which you rotate from one to the next. Even if you don't know the Enneagram, you're familiar with the 4-element theory of the Greeks. Earth, fire, water. Some people are earth, some people are wind, right? So there's temperaments, and you have to get to know your temperaments because you have your own cycles and you have your own proportion of elements. And you see, we're not taught this in school. We're not taught we need to study ourselves. We're taught to go out always, right? So now is to study you. How many of you are there? 7 glands, 4 brains, at least. So George Russell said, I am a multitude. He didn't say I am legion. So you have to decide which is legion and which is multitude.
So with materialism, we're penetrating into the interior of the Earth and compressing the forces of gravity, density, so that they are much more non-locally distributed. And the woman, as the man penetrates the 9 layers of the inner Earth, begins to be in tune with this, with her womb operating as an antenna. And this, the materialism, the gravity, and the challenging forces of the 9 layers, which allegedly surround at the very core, the very nucleus, what Goethe called the realm of the mothers, which was the city of gold, Shambhala, Agartha. What the alchemists called in the center of the Earth was a gold dew, a gold vapor, which is the amniotic fluid for the Earth becoming a new solar system. And as we enter these areas, we begin to experience the forces of gravity, density, much more intensely as we're releasing them. And it isn't that we aren't supposed to go there, but we do have to develop the upper levels that reflect, that the lower levels reflect, in order not to be overwhelmed. And this happened periodically. Carl Karenyi, the Jungian, did a brilliant book on Pan and the Function of Nightmare, where he actually chronicled whole towns waking up simultaneously at 2 in the morning and running out screaming, hysterically, no bearings, out of their houses at the same time in one village. So these forces of depression are part and parcel of the isometrics, the calisthenics that we'll have to work with in the process of public initiation. Now, what I was characterizing as the period now from 2004 to 2012, in the first half, there was sort of a planetary signature that served as the gauntlet down. The challenge of the first 4 years was the Neptune-Saturn opposition. And right at the end of 2005, beginning of 2006, there was a Mars-Jupiter opposition making a grand square for a period of time. This 4 years, it's the Saturn-Uranus opposition 5 times. And that started phasing in the fall of 2008 when the world money market went down the Teflon water slide. And it goes 5 times. There's 2 more this spring and this summer before it finishes out. Now you have to remember that the last time Saturn opposed Uranus was in 1966. It was sort of the center flashpoint for the revolutionary 60s. At that time, Uranus was conjunct Pluto, opposed Saturn. Now they're both square Pluto. And Jupiter's coming in.
Remember that when you have a square, you have an ambush. And like a corral, it's a square, it's a corral. The energies get trapped in a box, so they're forced to feel each other. So when you've got this Pluto square, he's talking about Pluto is the planet of, talk to me, death and transformation. So now transformation is being forced. That means it doesn't feel very good. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's right on time. Astrologically, the healthcare plan is just the beginning. You ain't seen nothing yet.
So
I hate to be the bearer of bizarre news, but You've seen worse. So this square of Pluto is about meeting the shadow and being forced to deal with it. You want a little yoga trick to help you deal with the shadow?
Yeah.
I can't tell you unless you ask.
Yes.
Okay. The summer's coming, so it's good. Is it the groundhog or Jesus that sees his shadow? It's neither one. It's you. It's you. And when you come out of the tomb, you see your own shadow. So what the Essenes and the Therapeutii of Egypt used to do, you stand at sunrise and you look at a white wall. It has to be whitewashed, white, white, white. The sun is on your back and you look at your shadow. And you project with your extremely well-developed concentration, which you will have when you do this, at your shadow yourself. And you will gaze at this shadow as you, at the back of the neck, right where the hangman's noose goes, right where the guillotine cuts. And you will look at the back of the neck of the shadow until your eyes water. And then you let yourself blink, wash your eyes, and do it how many times? 3. Christ is in the grave how many days? 3 days. Okay, so you do 3 blinks, look at your shadow, imagine it's yourself, and you will lure your 9 layers of the inner earth out. You will start to suspect things. You will start to have emotions. And I cannot tell you because each person is different. But this is a wonderful yoga. And you'll process it really fast because there's nothing more menacing than your shadow once you put yourself into it. It's like a child running up the stairs at night because he knows something's behind him. So after you do your 3 shadow gazes, you look straight up at the sky and there'll be a flash from your retina, and what will you see in the sky? Your shadow, but where is it? And is it big or small? Mm-hmm. And it's not black.
It's a reverse image.
It's a reverse image. Now I'll tell you something else, and I'll just give you a little hint on this. If you're staring at your shadow, well, Alan told me to do this, it's supposed to do something. No, you have to trust yourself. Prove it to yourself. It doesn't matter what I say. I give you an exercise, you just prove it. You know, it's not like that fake gold they found out Fort Knox is full of. If it's real gold, you test it. So if I give you shadow exercise, if you want to do it, you test it. When you're looking at the shadow, you might see a color around the border. Okay? That's the color of your aura. And you'll see it with your physical eyes, not with your psychic eyes. You'll see it with your optic nerve. And when you close your eyes, you'll see a color also. And the first color will be your guardian angel. The second color, it'll change, will be the opposite again, and that'll be your second guardian, third guardian, fourth guardian. So your brain will possess these luminous images, and it'll give you the colors that you need to work with in meditation. How you like that? It's real simple. And you don't need a master to do it. Just put it in your little do-it-yourself kit. But you need a nice sunny day and you need a whitewashed wall to work with the shadow forces. Very, very ancient exercise. So work with that. That is also helpful for processing depression, but it's too severe for a depressive to do that exercise. Does it make sense to you? It's too severe? So if you have a depressive or a suicidal, what you do is you turn them around to face the sunrise. And that's a 40-day protocol, and they cannot do it on medication because it will block the harmonic frequency of the sun in the liver. Okay. 40 days each day. Just watch the sunrise come up. You don't have to stare at the sun, although you might want to after a while. And the endocrine system will, the chemistry of the endocrine system will be completely changed. If it's, how many days? 40. 39 days?
40.
How about 32 days? I feel like smoking.
40.
No. Pancakes calling my name. 12th day. No, sorry. 40. So you've really got to fill it up. You got to fill up your tank of optimism with the sun, because it has the power to sustain the earth, and it has the power to sustain you. Okay. And artificial light will not do it, as seductive as it is. Two things very seductive in modern life: white sugar and artificial light. Computer light, very beautiful, right? Beautiful colors, none of it real. High digital television this big. Anything to keep you from looking at what? And the sun. It's all a distraction. So between the sun and you don't really need anything else except for your shadow. But you got to be equipped for that. Go ahead.
So what, keeping the descended master distractor factor in mind, I find, it seems, as seeming as such, that particularly over the last 4, 6 or so years, that during this public initiation period, everyone is in principle experiencing what the disciples experienced during the 3 years with Christ, which isn't fun and which isn't pretty. You had to strip to core in order to tune in to carry in some way possible the entire macrocosmic template within a human body. And that as the etheric forces and the tree of life are loosened, are opened up, are being quickened, energized in the whole ore of the earth, time is accelerating. It's not a relative phenomenon. You can actually get a good historical functional view of that in Time Wars by Jeremy Rifkin, that we are functionally changing the tuning forks that we use to put ourselves in line with as far as time measurement. And a number of people have begun to experience living a number of lifetimes in one lifetime. Things get faster and faster, and more interpenetrating, more intense, and it's never going to slow down. It's just going to keep exponentially leapfrogging. And those of us who can orient or develop the stable state physics of the soul will be able to navigate those new energies and map them, and in the process be able to emulate the miracles of the masters and Jesus, as it were.
Sure.
We will be able to enact the full ability of our higher self, begin to bring it in
That's fine.
as creator beings or as co-creator beings. Those of us who do not, cannot, will not integrate the spirit with the stable state physics of the soul will go into conservation mode, and in doing so will opt for security.
In other words, if you can't deal with it, you'll get a health care plan.
And
In other words, the need, you will feel the need, because of the pace of life, you will feel the need to be taken care of like you have never felt it before. Does that make sense to you?
and those who
So
are
that is real. You're not imagining it. Okay, you're fine. That is how you're going to feel because of what he's describing. The question for you is, how do you choose to deal with it? Do you run to someone to help you, or do you run to a government or an authority figure, or do you go inward and try to find the solution inwardly? There's two different ways to do it. And it's if you never grew up, if you never were initiated, and we have a nation of men who have never been initiated, because there's no rites of passage in America. It's not like Brazil or some of these primitive countries where men, like Africa, where men are initiated. We have a nation of adult children who have never faced death. A lot of them have never been hungry a day in their life. And you've got to realize these are the people who may be 60 on the outside and 4 on the inside. And so they're going to start saying, where'd the money go? What happened? Somebody get me out of this. Help me. I need a tit to suck. See, they want to be rescued. They want to be mothered. Do you understand? It's because there's a particular missing element in the society. And that means that older people have to be initiated or they're going to stay children, which is fine. I mean, if we believe in reincarnation, it's all coming back around and again until we get it right anyway, right? But I'm just telling you that the stress you feel from what he's saying and from what you know is a real thing. What's different is the way we cope with it.